Welcome. Before we start, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? Leave that in the comments. I will love to know. Well, so these are 3 Christmas dinners people shared anonymously. They all remember the same thing. No one enjoyed them. Not because of one big moment, but because something was never allowed to surface. These stories don't sound extreme. They sound familiar. So grab a drink, get comfortable, and let's start with the first dinner.
Christmas dinner was never loud in my family. People used to comment on that, how calm it was, how peaceful everything seemed. The table was always perfect, every plate aligned, every glass filled, food arranged carefully as if presentation mattered more than taste. When we sat down, everyone already knew the rhythm. Sit straight, smile politely, ask safe questions. No one ever said what those questions were. We just knew which ones not to ask. Someone would eventually say, "Well, let's eat." And we would, slowly, carefully. Not because the food was hot, but because movement drew attention. Forks touched plates, knives cut small pieces, but no one ate much. We all noticed it. No one commented. That was Christmas dinner. The silence didn't feel accidental. It felt practiced. Every year it was the same. Different houses, different decorations, same atmosphere. Even as kids, we understood it without explanation. You don't talk about certain things here. You don't bring real life to the table. Christmas dinner wasn't for honesty. It was for appearance. I remember one year noticing how everyone kept their voices at the same level. Not quiet, just controlled. Laughter never lasted too long. Stories ended early. Anything that leaned too personal was redirected. Someone would mention the weather, work, a TV show, anything neutral enough to keep the table intact. One year, my aunt didn't follow the rhythm. She wasn't trying to cause trouble. She just seemed tired of pretending. She laughed a little louder, asked people how they were actually doing, not the polite version. The room shifted instantly. My uncle adjusted his chair. My mother reached for her glass. Someone cleared their throat. No one said anything. They didn't need to. The message was immediate. Not here. Not tonight. My aunt noticed. She smiled awkwardly and looked back down at her plate. The silence returned, thicker than before. Later, I asked my mother why things always felt like that. Why Christmas dinner felt like something we endured instead of enjoyed. She didn't hesitate. She didn't explain. She just said, "Some conversations don't belong at the table." I didn't ask what conversations she meant, because I already knew. As the years passed, the pattern never broke. People grew older, new partners joined, children came and went. The silence stayed. Once I brought someone from outside the family. After dinner in the car, they asked me, "Did something happen tonight?" I said no, because nothing obvious had. But they said it felt like everyone was holding something in, like the dinner was balanced on a rule no one explained. I laughed it off, said my family was just quiet. But that wasn't true. We weren't quiet. We were careful. The reason only surfaced years later, and not at the table. Never at the table. It came out on a random afternoon, in the kitchen, when no one was pretending anymore. Years before I was old enough to remember, there had been a Christmas dinner that broke the rhythm. The table was set the same way, the food was served, the conversations were polite, until someone said something without thinking. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even intentional. Just a comment, a memory, a detail that didn't line up, a story about a moment that shouldn't have existed. Two people at the table understood it instantly.
A third realized seconds later. A glance was exchanged, then another. The room went silent in a way that felt different, not polite, not controlled, exposed. The realization settled before anyone spoke, a relationship that wasn't supposed to exist, a line that had been crossed quietly between people who were supposed to be family, a betrayal between in-laws, hidden well enough to survive daily life, but not careful enough to survive a dinner table. No one confronted anyone. No one demanded explanations. They didn't need to. Everyone understood what had been revealed, and that was worse. That dinner ended early. People left quietly. Goodbyes were short. The family didn't break apart. They stayed together, at least on the surface. But the table changed forever. From that night on, Christmas dinner stopped being a place where anything real could happen. It became controlled, scripted, safe. Silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was necessary. Because once honesty slipped in, and it had nearly undone everything. So every year after that, the rules weren't spoken. They didn't need to be. Don't ask real questions. Don't tell real stories. Don't relax enough to forget yourself. Eat slowly. Talk lightly. Leave nothing behind. That's why no one enjoyed those dinners. They weren't meant to be enjoyed. They were meant to prevent something worse, to make sure no truth ever found its way back to the table. And if no one enjoyed it, at least nothing fell apart again. That was the trade, and we accepted it, every year, without ever questioning why.
The first dinner was about silence. This one was about pretending, because sometimes the worst dinners aren't quiet, they're polite.
That Christmas dinner was loud. Not in a chaotic way, not with laughter or warmth. It was loud with people. Too many voices, too many chairs, too many reasons to be there. The kind of dinner where everyone shows up not because they want to, but not showing up would mean something. The table was long, extra leaves added, plates packed tightly together. There wasn't much room to breathe. Someone commented on how nice it was that everyone made it this year. That sentence hung in the air longer than it should have, because everyone knew there were at least 2 people at that table who would have preferred not to. They were seated across from each other, not by accident, not by oversight, just close enough to be unavoidable, just far enough to avoid direct conversation. They smiled, they nodded, they passed dishes back and forth. They never looked each other in the eye. Everyone else noticed. That's the part people don't talk about enough, how obvious it is when adults are pretending. They think they're subtle, they think they're polite, but the tension changes the room. It becomes the room. People start adjusting around it. Topics get filtered, jokes die early. Children sense it before they understand it. That dinner started like every other. Someone complimented the food, someone asked about work, someone else made a comment about the weather, even though everyone had arrived together. Safe conversation, neutral ground. Every sentence was chosen carefully, like stepping stones across thin ice. The 2 people across the table from each other never spoke directly. They spoke through others. Can you pass this to her? Tell him there's more bread. Polite, distant, careful. If someone didn't know better, they might think nothing was wrong, but everyone knew better, because this wasn't new. This dinner had been uncomfortable for years. Different houses, same seating tension, different decorations, same careful tone.
It all started long before that night, but that night made it impossible to ignore. One of them laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. The other smiled without warmth. Someone tried to change the subject. Someone else pretended not to notice. Plates filled, plates emptied slowly, food eaten out of obligation. No one seemed hungry. No one left early. That's another rule at dinners like this. You stay, you endure, you prove something by lasting. The children were restless. They asked to be excused. They were told to wait. Adults sipped drinks they didn't want. They refilled glasses they hadn't finished. Every movement felt intentional. Every pause felt watched. At one point, someone suggested a toast, not because it felt right, because it was time. The glasses were raised. The words were generic. Family, being together, another year. The two across the table raised their glasses too. They didn't clink. That detail stuck with me.
Later, someone started telling a story from years ago, a memory that should have been harmless. But halfway through, they stopped, corrected themselves, changed a detail. No one asked why. Everyone knew. The dinner wasn't about enjoying the food. It wasn't even about enjoying each other. It was about maintaining the image. Because years earlier, that image had cracked. It happened at another Christmas dinner, one that looked normal until it wasn't. Back then, the tension hadn't existed yet, at least not openly. People laughed, wine flowed, conversations overlapped. Someone brought up an old story, a trip, a party, a moment that involved more than one person at the table. At first, it sounded like nostalgia. Then a detail slipped. A name was used incorrectly. A timeline didn't add up. Someone froze. Another person went quiet. And suddenly, the story couldn't continue. Because what had just been revealed wasn't supposed to be revealed like that. It was a betrayal. Not dramatic, not shouted, but unmistakable. Two people who weren't supposed to be involved had been, and everyone at the table realized it at the exact same moment. The silence that followed was immediate. Someone laughed nervously. Someone tried to redirect, but the damage was done. The people involved didn't explain. They didn't deny. They didn't have to. The truth had surfaced in the worst possible place, in front of everyone, with no warning, no control. The dinner ended awkwardly. People left early. Goodbyes felt forced. No one talked about it afterwards, not properly. They chose the easier option. They kept the family together. They kept inviting everyone. They kept pretending. But the tone changed. From that year on, those two were never separated at the table. Not out of cruelty, out of caution. So everyone could see them, so nothing else slipped. The dinner became a performance. Every year the same act, the same smiles, the same polite distance. Everyone played their part. Because confronting it would mean choosing sides, and choosing sides would mean admitting that togetherness was already broken. So instead, they sat through it. Every Christmas, every dinner. No one enjoyed it, but everyone attended. That was the agreement. That night, years later, as I watched the same scene repeat itself, I realized something. The discomfort wasn't collateral, it was intentional. The dinner wasn't meant to feel good, it was meant to feel controlled. Because control is safer than honesty, and silence is safer than truth. As long as everyone stayed and no one spoke too freely, the family could pretend nothing had changed.
That's why no one ever enjoyed those dinners. Enjoyment requires ease. Ease requires trust. And that table had neither. Just people, plates, and a shared understanding that some things are never forgiven, only endured.
Before we start this last one, I'm curious again, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? You can leave that in the comments. This last Christmas dinner is different from the others. Nothing is hidden, nothing is implied. Everyone knows exactly what's wrong and still chooses to sit at the table. Let's start with the third dinner.
Everyone knew he was coming. That was the first thing about that Christmas dinner. Nothing was a surprise. Before the food was even ready, before the table was set, the question had already been asked. Usually quietly, usually in the kitchen. He's coming too, right? And the answer was always the same. Yes, of course. Not because anyone wanted that, but because saying no felt heavier than saying yes. The mood of the entire day depended on that answer. Once it was confirmed, everything shifted slightly. Not enough to cancel anything, just enough to change how people moved. Voices became more careful. Doors closed more softly. Conversations shortened. The table was set the same way every year. Plates, cutlery, glasses. But the seating always changed. Chairs suddenly rearranged. Certain people placed farther apart. Certain conversations avoided before they even started. No one talked about it. We didn't need to. When he arrived, he was polite. Always polite. He greeted everyone, smiled, brought a gift, made a comment about the food smelling good. If you didn't know the history, you would never guess anything was wrong. That's what made it so uncomfortable. Because everyone else knew. Once he was there, the room reorganized itself around him. Not physically, emotionally. People spoke a little slower, laughed a little less. Jokes stayed safe. The dinner started like any other. Compliments about the food, small talk about work, someone mentioning how fast the year went by. But there was a constant awareness, like everyone was monitoring themselves. Children picked up on it first. They always do. They were quieter, stayed close to their parents, looked around before speaking. At one point, one of them started to say something, a memory, a question, and was gently interrupted. Not now. Not harshly, almost lovingly. That phrase came up a lot that night. Not now. Later. Let's not get into that. The plates were full. The food was good. No one complained. And yet, no one enjoyed it. Because every conversation had to pass through an invisible filter. Would this make things uncomfortable? Would this remind someone of something? Would this cause a reaction? So most things were left unsaid. He sat there the entire time, eating, drinking, participating, as if nothing had ever happened.
The strange part was that no one openly disliked him. No one insulted him. No one avoided him completely. That would have been easier. Instead, everyone treated him with a kind of careful neutrality.
The way you treat someone you can't confront, but also can't fully trust. The dinner stretched on, not because people were having a good time, but because no one wanted to be the first to leave. Leaving early would mean something. Staying meant endurance. At some point, someone suggested a toast. It felt obligatory, like a checkpoint we had to pass. Glasses were raised, words were said about family, about being together, about another year. He raised his glass too. No one looked directly at him while they drank. After that, conversations thinned out. People focused more on their plates, on refilling drinks they didn't want. I remember noticing how often people checked the time, not enough to be obvious, just enough to measure how much longer they had to stay. The past hovered over the table, not as a memory, as a presence. Years earlier, things hadn't been this way. There was a time when he wasn't that person, when he was just part of the family. Back then, Christmas dinners were loud, messy, honest, until something happened. It wasn't revealed all at once. It came out in fragments, a conversation overheard, a detail that didn't make sense, a reaction that was too strong. Eventually, the truth settled. It involved trust and money and a decision that benefited him at someone else's expense. It wasn't illegal, it wasn't dramatic enough to explode the family, but it was enough to change how people looked at him and how they looked at themselves. The worst part was that the family didn't confront it properly. They talked about it privately, argued in small groups, cried behind closed doors, and then they stopped. They chose the version of events that allowed everyone to keep showing up. They chose peace over resolution. He apologized, in his way, vaguely, without details, and that was accepted, not because it was enough, but because dealing with it fully felt impossible. From then on, Christmas dinner became different. He was always invited, not because he was forgiven, but because excluding him would force a decision. And decisions were avoided at all costs. As the years passed, the dinner turned into a ritual of tolerance. One night a year, a few hours, a controlled environment. Everyone told themselves they could handle it, that it wasn't a big deal, that it was just one dinner. But the cost was obvious. Every conversation felt monitored, every laugh restrained. The dinner wasn't about joy. It was about proving something, that the family still existed, that no one had to choose sides, that time had smoothed things over. But time hadn't fixed anything. It had only taught people how to sit with discomfort. That night, as I watched him talk and laugh, as if nothing weighed on him, I realized something. The dinner wasn't uncomfortable because of what he did. It was uncomfortable because of what everyone else agreed to do afterward. They agreed to keep inviting him. They agreed to never fully address it. They agreed to carry it quietly. The dinner was the price of that agreement. That's why no one enjoyed it. Enjoyment would mean ease. Ease would mean honesty. And honesty would mean admitting that keeping the peace had cost them something real. So they ate. They smiled. They stayed. And when the night finally ended, everyone felt relieved. Not because the dinner was over, but because they wouldn't have to do it again for another year. That's when I understood. Some Christmas dinners aren't meant to be enjoyed. They're meant to be survived. Because surviving them allows everyone to pretend they made the right choice. And as long as everyone keeps showing up, no one has to admit that maybe they didn't.